April 8, 1944. 29,000 feet above northern France, the air was so cold it could freeze a man's breath inside his oxygen mask. Lieutenant Thomas Caldwell felt it anyway, that knife-edge cold cutting through the cockpit of his P-51 Mustang, even as the Packard Merlin engine roared 6 feet in front of him. Below, the patchwork fields of occupied France spread out like a quilt someone had left in the rain. Grey-green, muddy brown, the occasional scar of a bomb crater, dark and ugly against the spring earth. But Tommy wasn't looking down. He was looking at the Focke-Wulf 190, pulling away from him 800 yards ahead and climbing. The German pilot knew what he was doing. No panic, no wild maneuvering, just a steady, professional climb into the thin air where engines either delivered or they died. The FW190's radial engine was singing a song Tommy knew too well, the sound of full power, full confidence, a machine doing exactly what it was built to do. Tom's Mustang was singing a different song. He pushed the throttle forward, all the way to the firewall, waited for the surge. It came, but it came slow, hesitant, like a man trying to run through water. The manifold pressure gauge sat there at 18 pounds per square inch. Should have been 25. The manual said 25. The engineers in Detroit who'd never seen combat said 25. But the gauge said 18, and gauges don't lie. 7 pounds of boost pressure. 7 pounds was the difference between a fighter and a paperweight at this altitude. Tommy watched the Focke-Wulf grow smaller. Not dramatically. Not the way a superior aircraft outclasses an inferior one, just steadily, incrementally, 10 yards, 20, 50, the gap widening like a wound that won't close. His airspeed indicator showed 385 miles per hour. The manual said his Mustang should do 440 up here. The gap between what his aircraft was supposed to deliver and what it actually produced might as well have been an ocean. Tommy's hands tightened on the stick. Not fear. He'd been flying combat for 14 months. He knew fear, and this wasn't it. This was something worse. This was the sick feeling that comes when you realize the tool you've trusted with your life is broken, and there's nothing you can do about it except watch the enemy fly away. The Focke-Wulf disappeared into a cloud bank, gone. The German pilot would land somewhere in France, tell his squadron mates about the American who couldn't keep up, and they'd all have a good laugh over schnapps. Tommy banked hard, turned for home. The engine droned on, steady, reliable, completely inadequate. And that's when he remembered. His kid brother Jamie was flying to England in 12 days with the exact same broken engine. Tom's hands were still shaking when he climbed out of the cockpit at Debden Airfield 40 minutes later. Not from the cold, not from the adrenaline crash that always came after combat, from something deeper, something that settled in his chest like a stone. The ground crew was already there, doing what ground crews do, checking for damage, refueling, preparing the aircraft for the next pilot who'd need it. They moved with the practiced efficiency of men who'd done this 1,000 times. Good men, professionals. But they couldn't fix what was wrong with this airplane. Tommy dropped to the tarmac, yanked off his leather helmet, ran a hand through sweat-damp hair. 28 years old, and he felt 50. The winter sun was weak over England, the kind of pale light that makes everything look washed out and tired, like the war had drained all the colour from the world. Staff Sergeant Frank Kowalski was waiting by the crew chief's station, wrench in hand. 36 years old, built like a fire hydrant, with hands that looked like they'd been carved from old leather. Polish immigrant, Detroit machinist, the best crew chief in the 354th Fighter Squadron, which meant he was the man who had to hear this complaint for the 3rd time this week. Tommy walked straight to him. "The boost pressure's off again, Frank." Kowalski's face didn't change. He'd heard it before. He pulled out a maintenance log that was getting thick with similar entries, flipped it open, ran a grease-stained finger down the page. "3rd time this week," Kowalski said. His voice had that flat Michigan accent, vowels stretched out like taffy. "I've checked the supercharger, checked the intercooler, checked the fuel mixture. Everything tests within spec when we run it on the ground. But in combat, In combat at altitude, the power just isn't there. Kowalski finished the sentence like a man reciting a prayer he'd said too many times. I know.
Tommy looked at his Mustang.
Aircraft number 43-7012. The name Cherokee painted in white letters across the cowling, a reference to his home county in Iowa. She was a beautiful machine, sleek, deadly looking, the kind of aircraft that made men believe in American engineering. Except American engineering had built an engine that couldn't deliver what it promised. Can you fix it? Tommy asked. Kowalski closed the maintenance log, looked Tommy in the eye. Not without breaking regulations, and I got regulations memorized. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I got. A C-47 transport was coming in for landing, the sound of its twin engines Doppler shifting as it passed overhead. Somewhere on the other side of the field, somebody was revving an engine for a test run. The constant noise of an active airbase. The sound of a war that never stopped. Tommy reached into his flight jacket, pulled out a letter. The envelope was creased from being carried in his pocket. He handed it to Kowalski. Read it. Kowalski took the letter, unfolded it, scanned the handwriting. Young, enthusiastic, the kind of handwriting that still had hope in it. Dear Tommy, can't believe it's finally happening. Shipping out April 20th, should be in England by the 22nd at the latest. They assigned me to the 354th, same squadron as you. The CO said I could fly on your wing once I get checked out on the Mustang. I've been practicing everything you taught me, deflection shooting, energy management, check 6 every 3 seconds. I'm ready, Tommy. I know I am. Mom's worried, but I told her not to be. I'm flying with my big brother, the best pilot in the 8th Air Force, and they say the Mustang is invincible. Long range, fast, maneuverable. I can't wait to get in the cockpit. See you soon. Jamie Kowalski read it twice. Then he folded it carefully, handed it back. Your brother, he said. It wasn't a question. 19 years old. Still got baby fat on his face.
Tommy's voice was quiet.
He thinks the Mustang is invincible because that's what I told him in my letters. I didn't want him to be scared. He's a pilot. Scared is part of the job. He's my kid brother, Frank, and he's flying here with an engine that can't keep up with a German fighter. An engine that'll get him killed the first time he needs full power at altitude. Kowalski looked at the maintenance log in his hand, then at the Mustang, then back at Tommy. 12 days, he said. 12 days. The wind picked up, blowing across the airfield, carrying the smell of aviation fuel and exhaust. Somewhere a mechanic was hammering metal against metal, the sound ringing sharp and bright in the cold air. Lieutenant Caldwell, Kowalski said, and his voice had changed, gone formal, the voice a man uses when he's about to say something that can't be unsaid. If I tell you something, it stays between us. Clear? Clear. I know what's wrong with these engines. Tommy waited. It's not the design. The Packard Merlin V1650 is a damn good engine. On paper, it's identical to the Rolls-Royce Merlin that the British use. Same specifications, same theoretical output, 2-stage, 2-speed supercharger, liquid-cooled V12, 1,590 horsepower at 21,000 feet. On paper, Kowalski nodded, but paper don't fly combat missions. And the reality is, our engines aren't built to the same tolerances as the British engines. Supercharger clearances are looser, bearing qualities different, surface finishes aren't as precise. It all adds up. How much does it add up to? 5 to 7% power loss at high altitude, maybe 10% on a bad day. Tommy did the math in his head. 7% of 1,500 horsepower, about 100 horses. 100 horses that weren't showing up when American pilots needed them most. Why? Tommy asked. Why build them worse if we've got the same blueprints? Because building to spec and building to standard are different things. Kowalski set down his wrench, wiped his hands on a rag that was already black with grease. Packard builds to spec. If a part measures within tolerance, it's good. The British, they build to standard. They hand-fit parts. They individually balance supercharger impellers. They got craftsmen who've been building these engines since before you were born. We've got craftsmen too. We got assembly line workers following procedures, good workers, professional workers, but it's not the same. Kowalski's voice was tight. I worked at Packard before the war, luxury car division. I know precision machining. I know what these engines need. But the military sent me specifications to follow, and specifications say 18 pounds of boost is within acceptable range. Acceptable for who? For the accountants who signed the contracts. Kowalski picked up the maintenance log again, flipped through pages of entries. 27 complaints last week, all the same problem. Boost pressure drops at altitude. Power delivery inconsistent. Engine runs hotter than rated specs. And every time I test them on the ground, everything measures within tolerance. So we're flying broken engines that aren't technically broken. That's about the size of it. A jeep drove past, carrying a pilot who'd just landed. The pilot was young, maybe 22, and he had that look they all got after a rough mission, eyes distant, shoulders tight. He'd seen something up there, something he'd be seeing again in his dreams. Tommy thought about Jamie, 19 years old, baby fat still on his face, flying into combat with the same broken engines. "Can you fix it?" Tommy asked again. This time Kowalski didn't answer right away. He looked around the flight line, making sure nobody was close enough to hear. "Not officially," he said finally, "but there are modifications. Things I could do. Tighten the supercharger clearances, adjust the bearing surfaces, optimize the fuel mixture for high-altitude operation. It's not complicated work, just precise work. Would it make a difference? It'd get you closer to rated power. Maybe not all the way, but closer." "How much closer?" 22, 23 pounds of boost instead of 18. That's about 150 horsepower at altitude. Enough to catch that Focke-Wulf you were chasing today. Tommy felt something shift in his chest. Not quite hope, not yet, but something close. "Why haven't you done it already?" Kowalski's jaw tightened. "Because modifying military equipment without authorization is a court-martial offense. Because if I make a mistake and an engine fails, a pilot dies and it's my fault. Because I follow regulations, Lieutenant. That's my job. Your job is to keep these aircraft flying. My job is to keep them flying, according to the procedures the Army Air Forces gave me. There's a difference. Not to the pilots who can't catch enemy fighters because their engines are built wrong." Kowalski was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled something from his pocket. A photograph. Old. Creased. The kind of photo a man carries so long the edges have gone soft. He handed it to Tommy. 4 people in the photograph. A woman, maybe 35, 2 girls, perhaps 8 and 10, and a younger version of Frank Kowalski, standing proud in a suit, his arm around the woman's shoulders. "Warsaw, 1938, Kowalski said. "My wife, Marta, my daughters, Zofia and Anya." Tommy looked at the photograph. The family was smiling, the kind of smile you have when you think the future is going to be good. "Luftwaffe bombed Warsaw in September 1939, Kowalski continued. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something that had turned to stone a long time ago. "First week of the war. I was already in Detroit, working for Packard. Sent for them a month earlier, but the paperwork got delayed. They were supposed to come in October." Tommy handed the photograph back. He didn't know what to say. There was nothing to say. "I have no one to go home to, Lieutenant." Kowalski put the photograph back in his pocket, right over his heart. "These pilots flying these missions, they're why I'm here. Every one of them that comes back is—" He stopped, started again. "They're why I keep showing up. Then help me keep my brother alive." Kowalski looked at him, really looked at him. And Tommy saw something in the crew chief's eyes he hadn't seen before. A kind of recognition, a kind of understanding that passes between men who've both lost something they can't get back. "If I do this," Kowalski said slowly, "and something goes wrong, if an engine fails because of my modifications, it won't. You don't know that." "No," Tommy admitted, "but I know what happens if we don't try. Jamie flies combat missions with an engine that can't deliver full power. Sooner or later, he needs that power to get away from a German who's better positioned, or faster, or just plain lucky. and he doesn't get it, and he doesn't come home. Kowalski was quiet. I made a promise, Frank. Tommy's voice was rough. Last time I saw my old man, 2 years ago. He was dying. Heart attack. Took 3 days. I sat with him in that hospital room in Iowa, and he made me promise to look after Jamie. Said Jamie was too young, too eager, too sure of himself. Said the war would chew him up if somebody didn't watch out for him. Your father know you were both going to end up in the same squadron? No, that's just luck. Good luck or bad luck, I'm not sure yet. Tommy looked at his Mustang again. But I made that promise, and I'm going to keep it, with or without your help. The wind blew again, colder this time.
Winter wasn't quite done with England yet.
Kowalski picked up his wrench, turned it over in his hands, thinking. What if we could modify the engines, he said finally. Not officially, not through channels, just what if? How would it work? We'd need precision tools. I can get those. I've still got contacts at Packard. We'd need time. Work at night when nobody's watching. We'd need to keep it quiet. If the wrong officer finds out before we can prove it works, court-martial. At minimum, dishonorable discharge, maybe prison time for sabotaging military equipment. And if we don't try? Kowalski looked at the photograph in his pocket, then back at Tommy. Your brother arrives in 12 days, he said. 12 days. That's not much time to test a modification. Then we better get started. Kowalski nodded slowly. Not agreement exactly, more like acceptance. The acceptance that comes when a man realizes he's going to do something dangerous because it's the right thing to do and there's no other choice. We do this on my terms, he said. We test everything. We document what works and what doesn't. And we use your aircraft first, not your brother's. If something goes wrong, it goes wrong with you, not him. Agreed. And if I tell you to stop, if I say a modification is too risky, you stop. No arguments. Agreed. Kowalski held out his hand. Tommy shook it. The handshake of men making a pact that could get them both court-martialed or worse. Midnight, Kowalski said. Hangar 3. Bring your flight manual and anything else you've got on engine specifications. I'll be there. Kowalski turned back to the Mustang, picked up his tools. Back to work. Just another mechanic maintaining another aircraft on another day in a war that seemed like it would never end. But Tommy saw something different now in the way Frank Kowalski moved. A kind of purpose, a kind of determination. The same thing Tommy felt. 2300 hours. Hangar 3 was dark except for a single work light that cast long shadows across the concrete floor. The smell of oil and metal and aviation fuel hung thick in the cold air. Outside, the wind rattled the hangar doors, making sounds like ghosts trying to get in. Tommy arrived 10 minutes early, carrying his flight manual and a notebook full of observations he'd been keeping for the past 2 months. Every time the engine had failed to deliver full power, every time the boost pressure had dropped, every time something had felt wrong. Frank Kowalski was already there. He'd pushed Tommy's Mustang into the hangar, closed the doors, and set up a workspace that looked like a surgeon's operating theatre. Precision tools laid out in careful rows, micrometers, calipers, feeler gauges, instruments that could measure clearances down to thousandths of an inch.
You know how to use those? Tommy asked.
I machined cylinder heads for Packard luxury cars before the war. V16 engines for people who had more money than sense, tolerances tighter than what they use for aircraft. Kowalski picked up a micrometer, handled it like a man holding something precious. Yeah, I know how to use them. He'd already removed the engine cowling from Tommy's Mustang. The Packard Merlin sat exposed, all its complexity visible. 12 cylinders arranged in a V, the supercharger mounted on top, driven by gears and shafts. The maze of fuel lines and ignition wires and cooling passages. A mechanical heart that was supposed to produce 1,500 horsepower, but couldn't quite manage it. First thing we need to do, Kowalski said, is figure out exactly where the power's going missing. Could be the supercharger clearances, could be bearing friction, could be the intercooler efficiency, could be all three. How do we test that? The old-fashioned way, we measure everything. Compare it to what the British are doing. Find the differences. Tommy pulled out his notebook. I got drawings of a Rolls-Royce Merlin, sketches I made when I borrowed access to a British hangar. Kowalski raised an eyebrow. Borrowed? The squadron leader was giving me a tour. He got called away. I had my notebook. Time is short during war. Uh-huh. Kowalski took the notebook, studied the drawings. His face changed. These are good, really good. You got an eye for mechanical detail. Farm kid. Grew up fixing tractors with my old man. He always said if you can't draw it, you don't understand it. Smart man, your father. He was. Kowalski compared the drawings to the Packard engine in front of them, took measurements with his calipers, made notes. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this kind of work 10,000 times. There, he said after 20 minutes. Supercharger impeller clearance. The British run 0.002 inches. We're running 0.005. That's triple the gap. 0.003 of an inch. That matters? At 20,000 RPM, yeah, it matters. That gap bleeds off boost pressure. Air escapes instead of compressing. You lose efficiency. Kowalski made more notes. And look here. Bearing surface finish. The British hand-scrape these to get them perfectly smooth. Our bearings are machined. Good quality, but not hand-fitted. More friction means more power loss. Can we fix it? Fix is the wrong word. We can't turn a Packard into a Rolls-Royce, but we can tighten tolerances, improve surface finishes, get closer to what the British are achieving. How much closer? Kowalski did some calculations on a scrap of paper. If we tighten the supercharger clearance to 0.0025, that's halfway between Packard spec and Rolls-Royce spec. And if we polish the bearing surfaces, and if we optimize the fuel mixture for high-altitude operation, I'd estimate we could gain 3 to 4 pounds of boost pressure. That's roughly 100 to 130 horsepower at 25,000 feet, maybe more. Tommy felt that thing in his chest again, that thing that was starting to feel like hope. When can we start? Kowalski looked at the engine, then at his tools, then at Tommy. Right now, he said. But you need to understand something. If I make a mistake, if I take off too much material or set the clearance wrong, this engine could seize at full power. If that happens at high altitude in combat, I know the risk. Do you? Because the pilot flying this aircraft dies, Lieutenant. That's not theoretical, that's real. I'll be the pilot flying this aircraft, not Jamie. We agreed. Kowalski's hands were shaking, just slightly, just enough to see in the work light. I haven't done precision work like this in 2 years, he said quietly. I've been following procedures, checking parts against specs, but this is different. This is feeling your way to perfection. My wife used to say I could hear when a bearing wasn't seated right just by the sound the wrench made, but that was a long time ago. I don't know if I still got it. Tommy thought about his father, dying in that hospital bed, making him promise. Frank, he said, you got a choice here. You can follow the regulations that say 18 pounds of boost pressure is within acceptable range. You can keep doing what you're doing, and nobody will blame you. It's not your fault Packard can't build engines as good as Rolls-Royce. Kowalski looked at him. Or, Tommy continued, you can remember why you're here. You said these pilots are why you keep showing up. Well, here's your chance to keep one more pilot alive. My kid brother, 19 years old. He thinks the Mustang is invincible because I told him it was. I need to make that true. The wind rattled the hangar doors again. Somewhere outside, a truck was driving past, its engine noise fading into the distance. Kowalski picked up a small grinding stone, examined it in the light. I'm going to start with the supercharger impeller, he said. Need to true up the balance first. Then we'll work on the clearances. You sure? No. Kowalski's voice was steady now, but I'm doing it anyway. He pulled a rolling stool over to the engine, sat down, started removing the supercharger assembly. His hands had stopped shaking. They moved with the precision of a man who'd done this kind of work his whole life. Tommy watched him work, watched him measure, watched him make microscopic adjustments with tools that could detect variations invisible to the naked eye.
"Tell me about your brother," Kowalski said as he worked, not looking up.
Jamie, 7 years younger than me. Ma had trouble with pregnancies, lost 3 between me and him. So when he came along healthy, she kind of doted on him. Pa tried to toughen him up, but Ma always got in the way. Sounds like a good mother. The best. She didn't want either of us to join up. But after Pa died and Pearl Harbor happened, we didn't see how we had a choice. Your mother know you're both in the same squadron now? Yeah, I wrote her. She wrote back saying she was going to pray every night until we both come home. Tommy paused. She's not a religious woman, hasn't been to church since Pa died, but she said she'd pray anyway, just in case. Kowalski made a note on his pad, adjusted something with a feeler gauge. Your brother know about this? He asked. About the engine problems? No. I've been keeping it out of my letters. Didn't want him to worry.
He's going to find out when he gets here.
I know, but by then, maybe we'll have it fixed. Or maybe we'll both be in Leavenworth prison for unauthorized modification of military equipment. There's that too. Kowalski actually smiled, small, tired, but real. They worked through the night, Kowalski measuring, adjusting, testing, Tommy helping where he could, learning as he went. The crew chief explained what he was doing, why it mattered, how each tiny adjustment would affect the engine's performance. Precision isn't about perfection, Kowalski said at one point, his voice low in the quiet hangar. It's about understanding where perfection is and getting as close as you can with the tools you have. The British, they've been building these engines for 10 years. They know where perfection is, they can feel it. We're learning, and learning takes time. We don't have time. Then we learn fast.
By 0400 hours, Kowalski had reassembled the supercharger with tighter clearances and rebalanced impellers. He'd polished bearing surfaces until they gleamed. He'd adjusted the fuel mixture controller for optimal high-altitude performance. That's all we can do tonight, he said, wiping his hands. Need to test it, but not here. We need altitude. We need combat conditions. I've got a patrol scheduled for 0700. That's 3 hours from now. Enough time to get cleaned up and grab some breakfast. Kowalski looked at the engine, his work, his modifications, his responsibility. If this fails, he said quietly, I'll never forgive myself. If it works, Tommy replied, you'll have saved my brother's life, and maybe a lot of others. That's a lot of weight to carry. Yeah. Your father, Kowalski said, the promise you made him, you really think you can keep it? Tommy thought about Jamie, 19 years old, baby fat still on his face, flying to England with dreams of glory and no idea that the aircraft he trusted was broken in ways the manual didn't mention. I have to, Tommy said. Kowalski nodded slowly. He started putting away his tools, each one returned to its proper place with the care of a man who respected his equipment. 11 days, he said. Your brother arrives in 11 days. 11 days. Better make them count. Tommy helped him push the Mustang back out of the hangar into the pre-dawn darkness. The engine cowling was back in place. From the outside, nothing looked different. Just another P-51. Just another fighter in a war full of fighters. But Tommy knew better. Somewhere inside that engine, measured in thousandths of an inch, was the difference between his brother coming home or not. 11 days to prove it worked. 11 days to keep a promise to a dying man. 11 days to close a gap that everyone said couldn't be closed. The eastern sky was just starting to lighten. Dawn coming, another day beginning. Tommy looked at his watch. 0430, 2.5 hours until takeoff. Get some rest, Kowalski said. You're going to need it. What about you? I don't sleep much anymore. Kowalski looked at the Mustang, at his work. Not since Warsaw. He turned and walked toward his quarters, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched against the cold. Tommy stood there for a moment, alone on the flight line. The wind had died down. Everything was quiet, except for the distant sound of engines being tested on the far side of the field. He thought about Jamie, about his father, about the promise. Then he turned and headed to his barracks. 3 hours until he'd find out if Frank Kowalski's midnight work had made any difference. 3 hours until he'd find out if hope was just another word for foolishness. 3 hours until the modified engine either sang the way it was supposed to, or failed in ways that would haunt them both forever.
April the 8th, 1944. Continued. 0700 hours. The cockpit of a P-51 Mustang at dawn smells like leather and aviation fuel and the particular metallic tang of instruments that have been operating in freezing temperatures all night. Tommy Caldwell breathed it in as he strapped himself into the seat, the familiar ritual of clips and buckles and adjustments that fighter pilots do without thinking. But this morning was different. This morning he was flying an engine that had been modified by a Polish mechanic in the middle of the night, using techniques that weren't in any Army Air Force's manual. This morning, the engine either worked or it didn't. And if it didn't, Tommy would find out at 25,000 feet with enemy fighters trying to kill him. Frank Kowalski stood on the wing, helping him with the shoulder straps. The crew chief's face was grey with exhaustion. No sleep, just 3 hours of nervous waiting. His hands moved automatically, checking connections, testing fittings, making sure everything was secure. Fuel mixture controller is set for optimal high-altitude performance, Kowalski said quietly, his voice barely audible over the sound of other engines starting around the flight line. You'll feel it respond differently above 20,000 feet, crisper, more immediate. If it works. If it works. Kowalski didn't sugarcoat it. Manifold pressure gauge, you should see 22 to 23 pounds at full throttle. Maybe 24 if everything's perfect. That's 4 to 6 pounds more than you had yesterday. And if I see 18 again? Then we failed. Kowalski's jaw was tight. And we start over tonight. 10 days left. I know. Tommy settled his hands on the stick and throttle. The controls felt the same as always, worn leather grips shaped by thousands of hands before his. But knowing what was different under the cowling made everything feel strange, foreign, like flying someone else's aircraft. Frank, Tommy said. Kowalski looked at him. Thank you. The crew chief's face didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, understanding, the acknowledgement that passes between men who've put everything on the line for something that might not work. Bring her back, Kowalski said. Both of you. He jumped down from the wing, signaled to the ground crew to pull the chocks. Tommy ran through his pre-start checklist, the litany of switches and checks and confirmations that had become muscle memory after 14 months of combat flying. Battery on, fuel selector to main tank, mixture rich, prop control forward. His hand went to the starter. He hesitated. What if the modifications had weakened something? What if the tighter tolerances meant more friction, more heat, more stress on components that weren't designed for it? What if the engine seized on takeoff and he augured into the ground in front of the entire squadron? What if Frank Kowalski's midnight work had created something more dangerous than the original problem? Tommy pushed the thought away, pressed the starter. The Packard Merlin coughed once, twice, then caught with that distinctive sound fighter pilots know in their bones. 12 cylinders firing in sequence, the supercharger whining as it came up to speed, the whole mechanical symphony building toward the moment when engine and airframe and pilot become one thing. But this time, something was different. The engine sounded cleaner, smoother, like someone had removed a rough edge Tommy hadn't even known was there. The vibration through the seat was more regular, more precise. The kind of precision that comes when tolerances are right and everything's balanced and the machine is operating the way it was meant to. Tommy looked at the manifold pressure gauge. Idle power, 8 pounds, normal. He glanced at Kowalski, standing 50 feet away. The crew chief was watching the cowling, his head tilted slightly. Listening. Reading the engine with his ears the way he'd said his wife claimed he could. Kowalski gave a small nod. So far, so good. Tommy ran up the engine, checking magnetos and fuel flow and oil pressure. Everything in the green, everything normal, except for that smoothness, that precision that hadn't been there yesterday. The tower cleared him for takeoff. Tommy taxied to the runway, 3 other Mustangs falling in behind him.
a standard 4-ship patrol. Nothing special, just another mission over France, looking for trouble, hoping to find it before it found the bombers. But for Tommy, this wasn't a standard mission. This was a test. He pushed the throttle forward. The Packard Merlin responded, and Tommy felt it immediately, that crispness Frank had mentioned. The engine accelerated without hesitation, without that slight lag he'd become so accustomed to, he'd stopped noticing it. The Mustang rolled down the runway, picking up speed. 50 knots, 60, 70. The tail came up. The wings bit into the air. At 90 knots, Tommy pulled back gently on the stick. The Mustang lifted into the English dawn like it had been waiting its whole life to fly. OH8, 15 hours. 22,000 feet over the channel, climbing toward France. Tommy kept one eye on the manifold pressure gauge and the other on his wingman. The 3 other Mustangs held formation, their silver skins catching the morning sun. Good pilots, experienced. Men who'd survived long enough to know their aircraft and trust their instincts. They didn't know they were flying with an experimental engine. Tom hoped they wouldn't need to find out. "Falcon Lead, this is Falcon 2. The voice in Tommy's headset belonged to Lieutenant Dalton Pierce, 25 years old, from somewhere in Tennessee. Good pilot, steady. "You running, Rich? Your engine sounds different." Tommy keyed his mic. "Just a calibration adjustment. Frank's been tinkering." "Seems smoother." "We'll see." They crossed into French airspace at 24,000 feet, the patchwork fields below giving way to the darker greens of forests and the grey ribbons of roads. No flak yet. No fighters. Just the endless visibility that comes with altitude and clear skies. Tommy checked his gauges again. Oil pressure good. Coolant temperature normal. Manifold pressure at 12 pounds. Cruise setting. Everything operating exactly as it should. But the real test would come when he pushed it to war emergency power. When he needed every ounce of thrust the engine could deliver. When the gap between adequate and excellent became the difference between living and dying. "Falcon Lead, bandits at 2 o'clock high, 5,000 feet above us." Tommy's head snapped right. There, tiny dots against the blue, almost invisible. He counted 4, maybe 5. "I see them. Falcon flight, climbing right. Let's see what they want." He pushed the throttle forward, beginning a gentle climbing turn toward the enemy aircraft. The Mustang responded, the engine note changing as the supercharger kicked into high gear. Manifold pressure climbing. 14 pounds, 16, 18. The bandits were turning toward them now. Definitely fighters. The silhouettes resolving into the unmistakable shapes of Messerschmitt Bf-109s. 4 of them. Hunting. 20,000 feet. Tommy's altitude advantage was gone. Now it was a game of energy and positioning, and who had the better engine. "Falcon flight, full combat power. Stay with your wingman." Tommy pushed the throttle all the way forward. To the firewall. War emergency power. And the Packard Merlin sang. That's the only word for it. Not roared, not screamed. Sang. The engine note climbed to a pitch Tommy had never heard from his aircraft before. Clean and strong and absolutely confident. The manifold pressure gauge swept past 18 pounds, past the disappointing number that had defined every combat mission for the past 2 months. 19 pounds, 20, 21. The needle settled at 22 pounds and stayed there, rock steady, like it had found its home. Tommy felt the surge of acceleration press him back into his seat. The Mustang was climbing now like it meant it, like the difference between yesterday's engine and today's was the difference between a promise and a kept promise. "Jesus, Lead," Dalton's voice crackled over the radio. "What the hell did Frank do to your engine?" Tommy didn't answer. He was too busy flying. The 109s were turning into them, setting up for a head-on pass. Classic German tactics. 4 experienced pilots who'd probably been flying combat since Poland or France or Britain. Men who knew their aircraft and knew how to kill. But today, Tommy had something they didn't expect. An American engine that could finally deliver what it promised. The 2 formations closed at a combined speed of over 700 miles per hour. Tommy picked his target, the lead 109, slightly ahead of the others. His gunsight Pipper tracked across the sky, leading the German fighter,
accounting for deflection and closure rate, and all the geometry of high-speed combat. 600 yards, 500, 400. Tommy's finger tightened on the trigger. The 6.50 caliber machine guns in the Mustang's wings hammered to life, the recoil shaking the airframe, tracers reaching out across the sky like angry fingers. The lead 109 flew straight into the stream of fire.
Pieces flew off the German fighter. Cowling panels, part of the canopy. The 109 snap-rolled left, trailing smoke, breaking formation, the pilot fighting for control. "Brake right," Tommy called, hauling his stick hard over. The Mustangs scattered, the 109s flashing past in the opposite direction. Tommy pulled through the turn, the G-forces crushing him into his seat, his vision tunneling as the blood drained from his head. But the engine kept pulling. Strong, steady, no hesitation. He rolled out, looked for the fight, found it. Two 109s tangling with Dalton and his wingman, a twisting dogfight at 23,000 feet. The other two Germans were climbing, trying to regain the altitude advantage. Tommy went after them, full throttle. The Mustang accelerated, and for the first time in 2 months, Tommy felt like he was flying the aircraft he'd been promised. The 109s were climbing hard, their Daimler-Benz engines pulling them upward, but they weren't pulling away. Tom was staying with them. More than that, he was gaining. The manifold pressure gauge still showed 22 pounds. The engine still sang that clean, perfect note. Everything Frank Kowalski had done in the middle of the night was working exactly as he'd hoped. 25,000 feet. The air was thin here, oxygen masks crucial, engines straining. This was where the difference between good and excellent became visible, where the 5% gap between Packard and Rolls-Royce had always shown itself. But not today. Today, Tommy's Mustang climbed like it had a Rolls-Royce heart beating under the cowling. The lead 109 pilot realized he wasn't going to escape. He did the smart thing, reversed hard, turning back into Tommy, trying to force an overshoot, or at least make the American work for his kill. Tommy accepted the invitation. The two fighters merged in a turning fight, each trying to get position on the other. The 109 was good in a turn, smaller, lighter, more maneuverable at slow speeds, but the Mustang had energy, had speed, had an engine that was finally delivering what it promised. Tommy pulled hard, the stick back in his lap, the airframe groaning under the G-load. The 109 was turning inside him, but only just. Tommy reversed, using his speed to convert to altitude, then came back down with gravity on his side. The German pilot was good. He kept turning, kept fighting, trying to deny Tommy a shot. But Tommy had patience, and fuel, and an engine that wasn't going to quit. 3 turns. 4. 5. The fight spiraling down through 24,000 feet, both pilots breathing hard through their oxygen masks, both aircraft at the edge of their performance envelope. On the 6th turn, the 109 pilot made a mistake, just a small one. He pulled too hard, trying to get his nose around faster, and the 109 shuddered on the edge of a stall. Half a second. That's all Tommy needed. His pipper swung across the 109's fuselage. His finger squeezed the trigger. The guns hammered. Tracers walked across the German fighter from tail to cockpit. The canopy shattered. The engine belched black smoke. The 109 rolled inverted and dove, trailing fire. Tommy didn't watch it fall. He was already looking for the next threat, his head on a swivel, his breathing controlled, despite the adrenaline singing in his veins. "Falcon lead, this is 2. We're clear. 3 and 4 are engaging the stragglers." "Copy. Form on me." Tommy pulled out of the fight, leveled off at 23,000 feet, checked his gauges again. Manifold pressure, 22 pounds. Oil pressure normal. Coolant temperature, normal. Everything in the green, everything perfect. The engine that Frank Kowalski had modified was still running strong. "Lead, I don't know what Frank did," Dalton said over the radio, "but whatever it was, you need to buy that man a beer." "You just outclimbed a 109 at altitude. I've never seen that before." Tommy looked at his manifold pressure gauge again. 22 pounds of boost, 4 pounds more than yesterday. 130 horsepower that hadn't been there before Frank's midnight work. 130 horses that had just helped him kill a German fighter and stay alive to tell about it. "Yeah," Tommy said quietly, "I think I will." 1400 hours. Frank Kowalski was waiting on the flight line when Tommy taxied in. The crew chief stood alone, away from the other ground crew, his arms crossed over his chest. His face was unreadable. Tommy shut down the engine, the Packard Merlin winding down with that same smooth precision it had shown all morning. No roughness, no unusual sounds, just clean, professional operation. He climbed out of the cockpit, pulled off his helmet. His hands were shaking slightly. Adrenaline, exhaustion, the aftermath of combat, but also something else. Relief. Kowalski walked up to the aircraft, put his hand on the cowling. Still warm. He stood there for a moment, not speaking, just feeling the metal, listening to the sounds of the engine cooling. "Well," he said finally. 22 pounds of boost, Tommy said. "Stable. All the way to 25,000 feet. No fluctuation. No roughness." Kowalski's shoulders dropped half an inch, tension releasing. "Combat?" "Engaged 4 109s. Outclimbed 2 of them. Shot 1 down." Tommy paused. "Frank, the engine performed better than it ever has. Better than I thought possible." "Any problems? Any unusual vibrations or noises?" "Nothing. It ran like a Swiss watch." Kowalski nodded slowly. Then he opened his toolbox, pulled out a small notebook, started making notes, recording data, building knowledge. "We need to test it again," he said. "One flight isn't enough. Could have been luck. Could have been optimal conditions. We need more data." "How much data?" "At least 5 flights. Different altitudes, different power settings, different atmospheric conditions. If it performs consistently..." He looked up from his notebook. "Then we know the modifications work. Then we can start thinking about doing it to other engines." "Other engines?" "Your brother's, for one." Kowalski's voice was quiet. "That was always the point, wasn't it?" Tommy thought about Jamie. 9 days now until his brother arrived in England with a standard Packard Merlin that would only deliver 18 pounds of boost. 9 days to prove these modifications were safe and reliable. "Yeah," Tommy said. "That was always the point." A jeep pulled up. The driver saluted. "Lieutenant Caldwell? Colonel wants to see you. Intelligence debriefing." Tommy nodded, returned the salute. He turned back to Kowalski. "We need to talk later. About expanding this. About what it would take to modify more engines." "Midnight," Kowalski said. "Hangar 3, same as last night." "You need sleep, Frank." "I'll sleep when your brother gets here and his engine works right." Kowalski picked up his tools. "Go give your debrief. I got work to do." He walked toward the hangar, and Tommy watched him go. 36 years old and moving like a man 20 years older. Exhaustion, stress, the weight of responsibility for modifications that could save lives or end them. Tommy climbed into the jeep, but as they drove away, he looked back at his Mustang, at the aircraft that had just outperformed a German fighter because a Polish mechanic had refused to accept good enough. 9 days until Jamie arrived. 9 days to turn one successful test into a proven solution. 9 days to close a gap that everyone said couldn't be closed. 1600 hours. The intelligence officer was a captain named Lawrence Garrett, 31 years old, West Point graduate, engineering degree from MIT. The kind of officer who understood both the science and the practice of aerial warfare. He listened to Tommy's combat report without interrupting, making notes on a yellow pad. When Tommy finished, Garrett sat back in his chair. "You outclimbed a 109 at 25,000 feet, he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "That's unusual. The Messerschmitt normally has an advantage in climb rate at that altitude." "Yes, sir." Garrett tapped his pen against his notepad. "Your crew chief, Staff Sergeant Kowalski, he made some modifications to your engine?" Tommy's chest tightened. This was the moment where unauthorized modifications could become a court-martial offense. "Calibration adjustments, sir. Nothing major." "Lieutenant Caldwell?" Garrett's voice was patient. "I'm an engineer. I've been tracking performance statistics for every squadron in the group. Your kill ratio over the past 2 months has been good, but not exceptional. Today, you engage 4 enemy fighters at altitude and shoot down 1 while suffering 0 damage. Your reported manifold pressure is 4 pounds higher than your previous missions. That's not calibration, that's modification. Tommy met his eyes. Yes, sir. Unauthorized modification of military equipment is a serious offense. Yes, sir. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up, walked to a filing cabinet, pulled out a folder. He opened it on his desk, turned it so Tommy could see. Performance reports, maintenance logs, pilot complaints about boost pressure at altitude. I've been documenting this problem for 3 months, Garrett said. 27 separate complaints from pilots in this group alone, all reporting the same thing, engines not delivering rated power at high altitude. I've sent reports up the chain, contacted Packard, got the same answer every time. Engines are within specification. He sat down again, fixed Tommy with a look. So, let me ask you something, Lieutenant. If you and your crew chief have found a way to make these engines perform the way they're supposed to, do you really think I'm going to stop you? Tommy blinked. Sir? I'm an engineer, Caldwell. I care about results. If Sergeant Kowalski's modifications work, if they're safe and reliable and can be replicated, then that's not a problem. That's a solution. But the regulations? The regulations say engines should perform to spec. Yours is now performing better than spec. I'd say that's following the spirit of the regulations, even if it bends the letter. Garrett leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You and Kowalski are going to document everything you're doing. Every measurement, every modification, every test result. You're going to give that documentation to me. And when this works, I'm going to make it official. Sir, if something goes wrong, I'll take responsibility. I'm the engineering officer. I should have solved this problem months ago. If you and a crew chief are doing my job for me, the least I can do is cover you. Garrett picked up his pen again. But I need data. Real data. Not just one successful mission. Can you give me that? Tommy thought about Frank Kowalski working through the night, about the precision measurements, about the careful documentation. Yes, sir, we can give you that. How long until you're confident these modifications are safe and reliable? Kowalski wants at least 5 more test flights, different conditions, different power settings. That's good methodology. Garrett made a note. What's driving your timeline? Tommy hesitated, then decided honesty was the only option. My brother, sir. He's arriving in 9 days, new pilot, assigned to this squadron. He'll be flying a standard Mustang with a standard engine that won't deliver full power at altitude. Garrett's expression softened slightly. You're trying to fix his engine before he flies combat? Yes, sir. That's a lot of pressure. It's my kid brother, sir. I made a promise. Garrett nodded slowly. He understood promises, understood family, understood what it meant to be responsible for someone else's life. 9 days, he said. That's not much time. No, sir. But if it works, how many other engines could Kowalski modify? Tommy hadn't thought that far ahead. I don't know, sir. He'd need help. Other mechanics who know precision work. I'll find them. Garrett stood up, held out his hand. You focus on the testing. Get me the data. Prove this works. I'll handle the administrative side. Tommy shook his hand. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. We've got 9 days to turn unauthorized modifications into standard operating procedure. That's going to take some creative paperwork. Garrett smiled slightly. But I went to MIT. I'm good at creative problem solving. 1900 hours. The officers' mess was crowded with pilots finishing dinner. The conversation was loud, boisterous. Men who'd survived another day of combat, burning off adrenaline with stories and laughter, and the kind of dark humor that kept them sane. Tommy sat alone in a corner, eating mechanically, his mind elsewhere. Dalton Pierce dropped into the chair across from him. You going to tell me what Frank did to your engine? Dalton asked. Or do I have to start bribing crew chiefs? It's complicated. Try me. I got a degree in mechanical engineering from Tennessee Tech. Tommy looked at him. 25 years old, Steady hands, sharp mind. 32 combat missions and still alive, which meant he was either very good or very lucky, or both. "How much do you know about supercharger tolerances?" Tommy asked. "Enough to know that's where power gets lost at altitude. Clearance is too loose, boost pressure bleeds off." Dalton leaned forward. "You telling me Frank tightened the tolerances?" "Among other things." "Jesus, that's precision work. Thousandths of an inch. Get it wrong and the whole thing seizes." "He didn't get it wrong." Dalton was quiet for a moment. "Your engine performed like a different aircraft today, climbed like a Rolls-Royce instead of a Packard. That's the idea. Can he do it to other engines?" "Maybe. We're still testing." Dalton looked around the mess hall, making sure nobody was close enough to hear. "Tommy, if you can make these engines perform the way they're supposed to, that changes everything. The Mustang's already the best escort fighter we've got, but if the engines actually delivered full power, we'd have air superiority locked down. One step at a time. We need to prove it's safe first." "How many test flights?" 5 more. Different conditions." "I'll volunteer. Let Frank modify my engine. Give you another data point." Tommy shook his head. "Too risky. We don't know enough yet. You flew it into combat today. That was my choice, my risk, and I'm making the same choice." Dalton's voice was firm. "Tommy, we're all flying engines that don't work right. Every pilot in this squadron knows it. We've just been living with it because we didn't have a choice. Now, maybe we do. Let me help." Tommy studied his face, saw the same determination he felt. "I'll talk to Frank," he said finally. "But he makes the decision. If he says the modifications aren't ready, we wait." "Fair enough." Dalton stood up. "Oh, and Tommy, your brother, when he gets here, you going to tell him what you're doing?" "I don't know." "My advice? Tell him. Kid deserves to know his big brother's working on keeping him alive." Dalton walked away, leaving Tommy alone with his half-eaten dinner and his thoughts. 9 days, 5 test flights. And somewhere, across the Atlantic, Jamie Caldwell was probably writing another enthusiastic letter about how excited he was to fly the invincible Mustang with his big brother. The weight of it pressed down on Tommy's shoulders, the responsibility, the promise, the knowledge that everything, the midnight modifications, the risky tests, the creative paperwork Captain Garrett was probably already drafting, all of it came down to one simple thing. He'd promised his father he'd bring Jamie home. And a promise was a promise, even if keeping it meant breaking every regulation in the book. 2200 hours. Tommy was walking across the dark airfield toward Hangar 3 when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. A British officer was approaching, Squadron Leader David Henderson, 33 years old, RAF, Yorkshire accent. Flew Mustang Mark IIIs with Rolls-Royce Merlin engines. "Lieutenant Caldwell," Henderson said. "Might I have a word?" Tommy stopped. "Sir." Henderson pulled out a cigarette case, offered one to Tommy, who declined. The British officer lit his own, the match flaring bright in the darkness. "I heard about your engagement today," Henderson said. 4109s. You outclimbed them at altitude." "Yes, sir." "That's unusual. American Mustangs typically struggle above 25,000 feet. Engine performance drops off. Your aircraft seem not to have that problem." Tommy didn't respond. Henderson smiled slightly. "I'm not here to make trouble, Lieutenant. Quite the opposite. I'm curious." "About what, sir?" "About how an American pilot in an American Mustang suddenly has performance characteristics that match my British Mustang with a Rolls-Royce engine." Henderson took a drag of his cigarette. "Because if you found a way to make Packard engines perform like Rolls-Royce engines, well, that would be rather significant." "I couldn't say, sir." "No, I suppose you couldn't." Henderson looked toward Hangar 3. "But hypothetically, if someone were attempting to improve American engine performance, they might benefit from understanding how Rolls-Royce achieves their standards." "Hypothetically." "Quite." Henderson reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded document. "This is a maintenance manual for the Rolls-Royce Merlin 68. It contains tolerances, procedures, and techniques that aren't in the standard technical orders. Normally, this would be classified RAF material." He held it out. Tommy stared at it. "Sir, I can't." "You're not taking it, Lieutenant. I'm leaving it here on this bench because I'm a careless officer who sometimes misplaces important documents." Henderson set the manual down. "If someone were to find it and return it to me in, say, a week, I'd be most grateful." "Why would you do this?" Henderson's smile faded. "Because we're fighting the same war, Lieutenant, and because I've lost too many good pilots to equipment that didn't perform when it needed to. If the Americans can improve their engines, that means more fighters over Germany, more protection for bombers, more pressure on the Luftwaffe." He paused. "And because my sister is married to an American pilot. He flies B-17s. I'd rather like him to survive the war." Tommy looked at the manual on the bench. "There's a chap at Rolls-Royce," Henderson continued. "Name's Albert Whitmore, master mechanic, been building Merlins since 1933. He's got knowledge that isn't written down anywhere, the kind of thing you learn from 20 years of listening to engines, feeling what's wrong before instruments can tell you." "How would someone contact him?" "I couldn't possibly say. But hypothetically, if someone were to ring the Rolls-Royce factory in Derby and ask for the senior master mechanic, they might get transferred to a gentleman with a thick Derbyshire accent who loves talking about engines to anyone who'll listen." Henderson dropped his cigarette, ground it out under his boot. "Good luck, Lieutenant," he said, "with your testing, or whatever it is you're not doing." He walked away into the darkness. Tommy waited a full minute. Then he picked up the manual, tucked it under his arm, and continued toward Hangar 3. Frank Kowalski was already there, the work lights on, tools laid out. He looked up when Tommy entered. "You're late," Kowalski said. "Had a conversation with a British officer." "That sounds ominous." Tommy set the Rolls-Royce manual on the workbench. "Not as ominous as you'd think." Kowalski stared at the manual like it was made of gold. "Is that RAF, Maintenance Manual for the Merlin 68? Complete tolerances, procedures, techniques." "How did you—" Squadron Leader Henderson left it on a bench. "By accident." Tommy smiled slightly. "We're supposed to return it in a week." Kowalski opened the manual with shaking hands, started reading. His eyes widened. Tommy, this is everything. Surface finish specifications, balancing procedures, the exact clearances they use for high-altitude operations." He looked up. "With this, I can get us even closer to Rolls-Royce performance." Henderson mentioned someone else, Albert Whitmore, master mechanic at Rolls-Royce. Said he's been building these engines since '33. "I know that name. He's a legend. They say he can hear a misaligned bearing from across the factory floor." Henderson suggested we call him, ask for advice. Kowalski was quiet for a long moment. Then he laughed, short, sharp. The kind of laugh that comes when a man realizes the universe has just handed him an unexpected gift. "An American officer and a Polish crew chief," he said, "getting advice from a British master mechanic to make American engines work like British engines. Your father would have appreciated the irony." "My father appreciated anything that got the job done right." "Smart man." Kowalski turned back to the manual, already making notes. "Give me 3 days with this information, and I can refine the modifications, make them more precise, more reliable. And then—" he looked at Tommy. "Then we can start thinking about your brother's engine." 8 days left. "I know." Tommy pulled up a stool. "What do you need me to do?" "Read, learn, understand what makes these engines work." Kowalski slid the manual across the workbench. "Your father taught you to fix tractors. I'm going to teach you to fix Merlins. By the time your brother gets here, you're going to know this engine as well as I do." "Why?" "Because if something happens to me, someone needs to know how to keep these modifications going." Kowalski's voice was serious. "This is bigger than just your brother, Tommy. This is about every pilot in this squadron, every pilot in the 8th Air Force. We get this right, we save lives. Lots of lives. And that's worth any risk." Tommy opened the manual, started reading. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the hangar doors. Another English night. Another step closer to morning. Another day closer to Jamie's arrival. But now, for the first time, Tommy felt like they might actually do it. They might actually close the gap. Not because they were smarter than the British, not because they'd found some magic solution, but because they'd learned what his father had tried to teach him years ago on an Iowa farm. Excellence isn't about perfection. It's about paying attention, about listening, about caring enough to do the work right, even when nobody's watching. Frank Kowalski understood that, and together, with a British manual and a legend, mechanic's wisdom, and 8 days of desperate work ahead of them, they were going to prove that American engines could sing like British ones. They just needed to learn the song. April 10th, 1944. OH 600 hours. The third test flight went as well as the first two. Tommy pushed the modified Packard Merlin to its limits at 28,000 feet, and it delivered 23 pounds of boost pressure without hesitation. The engine ran smooth, strong, precise, exactly as Frank Kowalski had promised it would. When Tommy landed and shut down, Kowalski was there with his notebook, recording data like a scientist, documenting a breakthrough. Oil temperature? Kowalski asked. Normal range, maybe 2 degrees cooler than usual. Vibration? Less than before the modifications. Kowalski made notes. 3 successful flights, same performance each time. We're building a pattern. How many more? 2, maybe 3. I want to test it in different weather conditions. Rain, low visibility. See if moisture affects the supercharger performance. Kowalski closed his notebook. But we're close, Tommy. We're really close. A transport truck rumbled past, carrying supplies toward the mess hall. The morning shift was beginning, mechanics reporting to their stations, pilots heading to briefings, the daily rhythm of an airbase at war. Tommy climbed down from the cockpit. When can we start thinking about other engines? Soon. I want 1 more week of data from your aircraft. Then we modify a second Mustang, get another pilot testing it, build redundancy into our knowledge base. Dalton volunteered. Kowalski looked up sharply. Lieutenant Pierce, he knows what we're doing. Hard to hide when your engine suddenly performs 30% better in combat. And he wants his engine modified? He's an engineer. He understands the science. And the risk. Kowalski was quiet for a moment. If I modify a second engine and it fails, we've doubled our exposure, doubled the chance of someone dying because of my work, or doubled the chance of someone living because of it. The crew chief looked at his hands, grease-stained, scarred from years of mechanical work, the hands of a man who'd lost everything in Warsaw and found purpose in keeping American pilots alive. 7 days, Kowalski said quietly. Your brother arrives in 7 days. I know. We're not ready for his engine yet. Not quite. We will be. You have a lot of faith in me. You've earned it. Tommy put a hand on Kowalski's shoulder. 3 perfect flights, Frank. 3 times you've made this engine perform the way it's supposed to. That's not luck. That's skill. Kowalski nodded slowly, but the weight was still there in his eyes. The knowledge that perfection in testing didn't guarantee perfection in combat, that engines were complex machines with thousands of ways to fail. Get some rest, Tommy said. You've been working 20-hour days. I'll rest when your brother's engine works right. Frank. Tommy. The crew chief's voice was firm. I lost my family because I wasn't there, because I was in America, building luxury cars, while the Luftwaffe destroyed Warsaw. I'm not losing anyone else, not if I can help it, not if staying awake a few more hours means the difference between your brother coming home or not. There was nothing to say to that. No argument that would change a man's mind when guilt and purpose had fused into something harder than steel. So, Tommy just nodded. Midnight tonight? Midnight. Kowalski picked up his tools. Bring the British manual. I want to cross-reference their intercooler specifications with what we're doing. He walked toward the hangar, and Tommy watched him go. 36 years old, and carrying the weight of 2 families, the one he'd lost and the one he'd found. 7 days until Jamie arrived. 7 days to turn good into perfect. 7 days
to keep a promise to a dead man. April 13th, 1944. 1400 hours. The weather had turned. Low clouds, drizzle, visibility down to 2 miles. Perfect conditions for testing how the modified engine performed when moisture in the air affected the supercharger's efficiency. Tommy was in the operations building studying weather maps when the phone rang. The operations officer answered it, listened, then held out the receiver. "Lieutenant Caldwell, for you." Tommy took the phone. Caldwell. "Tommy!" The voice on the other end was young, excited, crackling with distance and static. "It's Jamie!" Tommy's chest tightened. "Jamie? Where are you calling from?" "London. We landed 2 hours ago. They're processing our paperwork, but I should be at Debden by tomorrow morning. Maybe even tonight, if the transport schedule works out." Tomorrow morning. Not in 4 days like the original schedule said. Tomorrow. That's... Tommy's mind raced. "That's great, kid. Really great. I can't wait to see you. And to get into a Mustang. They let us sit in one at the staging area. Tommy, it's beautiful. I can't believe I'm actually going to fly one." "Yeah, it's a hell of an aircraft. I've been practicing everything you taught me. I'm ready. I know I am." Tommy looked out the window at the drizzle, at the flight line where his modified Mustang sat with an engine that had only been tested 4 times, at the hangar where Frank Kowalski was probably working on refining specifications that weren't quite ready to be applied to a second aircraft. 4 days. They'd lost 4 days. "Tommy? You there?" "I'm here. Just surprised. Good surprised. When exactly do you get here?" "Transport leaves London at 0500 tomorrow. Should arrive at Debden around 0700. Can you meet me?" "Yeah, of course. I'll be there." "Thanks, big brother. I'll see you tomorrow." The line went dead. Tommy stood there holding the phone, his mind spinning through calculations. Tomorrow morning meant Jamie would be assigned an aircraft by tomorrow afternoon, would start ground training by the next day, would be flying his first familiarization flight within 72 hours, with an unmodified engine that would only deliver 18 pounds of boost pressure. He handed the phone back to the operations officer and walked out of the building. Frank Kowalski needed to know. 1500 hours. Kowalski was in Hangar 3, working on a stripped-down supercharger assembly when Tommy found him. The crew chief had the impeller out, measuring clearances with a micrometer, his face lined with concentration. "Frank!" Kowalski looked up, saw Tommy's expression, set down his tools. "What happened?" "Jamie called from London. He's early. He's early. Gets here tomorrow morning." Kowalski's face went very still. "Tomorrow morning? Not next Tuesday." "Not next Tuesday." The crew chief looked at the supercharger assembly on his workbench, at his notes, at the careful documentation of modifications that had been tested 4 times, but not the 5 or 6 times he'd wanted before applying them to another aircraft. "We're not ready," Kowalski said quietly. "I know. I wanted at least 2 more test flights, wanted to refine the bearing tolerances, wanted to test the modifications on a second aircraft with a different pilot before we touched your brother's engine." "I know." Kowalski picked up the micrometer, turned it over in his hands. "If we modify his engine tomorrow and something goes wrong, if we miss something because we rushed, then we don't modify it tomorrow." Tommy's voice was steady. "We wait. We stick to the plan. Test 2 more times. Get the data you want. Then we do his engine right. And in the meantime? In the meantime, he flies a standard Mustang, same as everyone else, with an engine that won't deliver full power when he needs it." "Yeah." Kowalski was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down the micrometer and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner. He pulled out a folder, brought it back to the workbench. Inside were maintenance records, not just for Tommy's aircraft, for the entire squadron. 23 Mustangs in the 354th Fighter Squadron, Kowalski said, all with Packard Merlins, all with the same problem we've been trying to fix. He flipped through the records. In the past 3 months, we've had 6 combat losses. 4 were definitely due to enemy action, aircraft shot down in circumstances where engine performance wouldn't have mattered. But 2, he paused.
Two were pilots who got caught at high altitude, couldn't outrun or outclimb enemy fighters, and went down. Both good pilots, both experienced.
Both flying aircraft that should have been fast enough to escape. You're saying the engines killed them? I'm saying the 5% gap killed them. The difference between what these engines are supposed to deliver and what they actually deliver. Kowalski looked at Tommy. Your brother's going to fly into that same gap. And yeah, maybe he gets lucky. Maybe he never needs that extra 5%. But maybe he does. And if he does, and the engine can't give it to him. So what are you saying? We modify his engine tomorrow, even though you're not ready. I'm saying I don't know. Kowalski's voice was rough. I'm saying I'm a mechanic, not God, and I can't predict the future. I can't tell you whether the risk of rushing is greater than the risk of waiting. I can only tell you the data I have, and the data says we need more testing. Tommy thought about his father, about that hospital room, about the promise. What if we switch aircraft? He said suddenly. What? I fly his assigned aircraft. He flies mine, the modified one. Kowalski stared at him. You want your brother, on his first combat mission, flying an aircraft with experimental modifications he doesn't know about. I want my brother flying an aircraft that works right. And you said it yourself, 4 successful tests. The modifications are solid. 4 tests isn't enough. It's enough to know the engine won't fail catastrophically. It's enough to know it performs better than standard. And yeah, maybe we haven't tested every possible condition, but we've tested the ones that matter. High altitude, full throttle, combat maneuvering. Tommy leaned forward. Frank, you've built something that works. I've flown it. I trust it. And I'd rather have Jamie flying a proven modified engine than an unproven standard one. Kowalski looked at the supercharger on his workbench, at his careful notes, at the years of experience that told him to be cautious, to test thoroughly, to never rush precision work. Then he looked at the folder of maintenance records, at the names of pilots who died in aircraft that couldn't deliver the performance they needed. If something goes wrong, he said quietly, if the engine fails because we didn't test enough, then I'll be the one flying it, not Jamie. That's the whole point. You're asking me to gamble with your life instead of his. No. I'm asking you to give my brother the best possible chance of survival, which is what you've been doing for the past 2 weeks. The wind rattled the hangar doors. Rain was starting to fall harder, drumming on the metal roof. Your father, Kowalski said, what would he think of this plan? Tommy smiled slightly. He'd say I was being overprotective, that Jamie needs to learn to take care of himself. But he'd also say that's what big brothers are for, taking the risks so little brothers don't have to. Kowalski nodded slowly. All right, we switch aircraft, but I'm going to do one more inspection tonight. Check every modification, make sure everything's perfect, because if your brother's going to fly this engine, I want to be absolutely certain it's safe. Thank you, Frank. Don't thank me, just bring both of you home. Every mission, that's all the thanks I need. April 14th, 1944, OH 7:15 hours. The C-47 transport touched down at Debden in a light rain. Tommy stood on the flight line, collar turned up against the weather, watching as the rear door opened and pilots climbed out. He recognized Jamie immediately. 19 years old, 5'10", maybe 160 pounds. Still had that baby fat on his face that made him look 16 instead of 19. He wore his leather flight jacket like it was too big for him, which it probably was. His eyes were bright with excitement and nervousness, and the overwhelming sense of finally being here, finally being part of it. Tommy felt his chest tighten. This was who he was protecting. This kid who still looked like he should be playing baseball instead of flying combat missions. This kid who wrote enthusiastic letters about how invincible the Mustang was, because he trusted his big brother to tell him the truth. Jamie saw him. His face broke into a huge grin. Tommy! He ran across the tarmac, duffel bag bouncing on his shoulder. Tommy met him halfway, and Jamie threw his arms around him in a hug that nearly knocked them both over. I can't believe I'm here, Jamie said, his voice muffled against Tommy's shoulder. I can't believe we're actually in the same squadron. Tommy hugged him back, hard, felt how thin his brother was, how young, how completely unprepared for what was coming. Welcome to England, kid. I'm not a kid anymore. Jamie pulled back, grinning.
I'm a combat pilot. Or I will be once I get checked out.
Yeah, about that. Tommy picked up Jamie's duffel bag. Let me show you around, get you settled. Then we need to talk. Talk about what? About your aircraft, about the engines, about some things you need to know. Jamie's grin faded slightly. Is something wrong? Nothing's wrong. I just want to make sure you're prepared. They walked toward the barracks, rain falling steady now. Other pilots from the transport were being greeted by squadron mates, ground crew directing them to their quarters. The normal chaos of new arrivals. But Tommy's mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about how to explain to his 19-year-old brother that the engines didn't work right, that American manufacturing couldn't match British precision, that there was a 5% gap between promise and reality, and that gap could get you killed. And he was thinking about the modified engine in his original aircraft, the one Jamie would be flying once the switch was approved. The engine that had been tested 4 times instead of 6. The engine that Frank Kowalski had inspected until 3 in the morning, making absolutely certain every modification was perfect. Tommy? Jamie was looking at him with concern. You okay? You seem tense. Just tired. Long week. Tommy forced a smile. Come on, let's get you squared away. Then I'll introduce you to your crew chief. What's he like? Best mechanic in the 8th Air Force. Polish immigrant. Lost his family in Warsaw. Takes care of our aircraft like they're his children. Sounds like someone I should get to know. Yeah, Tommy said quietly. Yeah, you should. Because Frank Kowalski was the man who'd spent 2 weeks working miracles in the middle of the night. The man who'd closed a gap everyone said couldn't be closed. The man who was going to keep Jamie alive with precision measured in thousandths of an inch. If everything went right.
If the modifications held. If the promise could be kept.
1600 hours. Frank Kowalski met Jamie in Hangar 3. The crew chief shook his hand, looked him over with the appraising eye of a man who'd seen hundreds of young pilots, and knew which ones would survive and which ones wouldn't. You look like your brother, Kowalski said. Younger, skinnier, but the same eyes. Jamie grinned. Tommy says you're the best crew chief in the Air Force. Your brother exaggerates. I'm just thorough. He says you're going to take care of my aircraft. Kowalski glanced at Tommy. Something passed between them. Understanding, agreement, the weight of decisions made in midnight hangars. Actually, Kowalski said carefully, there's been a change. You're going to be flying aircraft 43-7012, your brother's regular Mustang. Jamie looked confused. Why? Because I've been maintaining that aircraft for 6 months, Kowalski said. It was true, even if it wasn't the whole truth.
I know every rivet, every system, every quirk. For a new pilot's first combat missions, I want you in an aircraft I know inside and out.
What about Tommy? I'll fly 43-7015, Tommy said. Your assigned aircraft. Break it in for you. Make sure everything's working right. Jamie looked between them. He was young, but he wasn't stupid. There's something you're not telling me. Tommy took a breath. This was the moment. The choice between protecting his brother with silence or protecting him with truth. The engines, Tommy said. The Packard Merlins. They don't perform as well as they're supposed to. Not at high altitude. It's a manufacturing issue. Tolerances aren't tight enough. You lose boost pressure when you need it most. Jamie's smile faded. How much? 5 to 7%, maybe 10 on a bad day. That's, Jamie did the math in his head, that's a lot of horsepower. Yeah. Does everyone know about this? Every pilot who's flown combat at altitude knows.
We've been living with it because we didn't have a choice.
And now? Tommy looked at Kowalski. The crew chief nodded slightly. Now we might have a solution, Tommy said. Frank's been working on modifications, tightening tolerances, improving efficiency, making the engines perform closer to spec. On my aircraft? On my aircraft, which you're going to fly. Jamie was quiet for a moment, processing. His face had gone serious in a way Tommy hadn't seen before. The kid was gone. The combat pilot was starting to emerge. You're giving me your aircraft, Jamie said slowly.
Because you trust the modifications more than you trust a standard engine. Yes. Even though the modifications are, what, experimental? Tested, Kowalski interjected. 4 successful flights, full combat conditions, no problems, no failures, performance exceeds standard specifications. But not officially approved? Not yet, Tommy admitted. Captain Garrett knows. He's the engineering officer. He's documenting everything, making it official. But right now, yeah, it's technically unauthorized. Jamie looked at the Mustang parked in the hangar. Aircraft 43-7012, Tommy's regular fighter. The one with Cherokee painted on the cowling. The one with an engine that had been modified in secret, tested in combat, and proven to work better than anything Packard was officially producing. You're taking a risk for me, Jamie said. I'm your big brother. That's the job. And if something goes wrong with the modifications on the aircraft you're flying, then Frank and I learn from it and fix it before you fly. Jamie shook his head. No. If you're taking the risk, I take it with you. We both fly modified engines. Or neither of us does. Jamie. I'm not a kid anymore, Tommy. Jamie's voice was firm. You don't get to protect me from everything. If these modifications make the engines safer, I want them. If they're risky, then we share the risk. That's how this works. Tommy looked at his little brother, saw the determination there, the stubbornness, the same thing that had made Tommy keep working when everyone said the gap couldn't be closed. It ran in the family. Frank, Tommy said, can we do both engines? Kowalski pulled out his notebook, flipped through pages of measurements and specifications. I'd need help. Can't do 2 engines in one night by myself. Dalton volunteered, said he's got mechanical engineering background. Lieutenant Pierce, Kowalski considered. He's smart, careful. If I train him on the procedures... He looked at Jamie. You understand what you're asking for. These modifications work, but they haven't been tested long-term. There could be problems we haven't discovered yet. I understand, Jamie said, but I'd rather fly an engine that might have unknown problems than one that definitely has known problems. Kowalski smiled slightly. You're definitely Tommy's brother, so you'll do it. I'll do it. Both engines, tonight. Kowalski closed his notebook. But you both follow my maintenance schedule exactly. No pushing the engines beyond limits, no cowboy stuff. These modifications buy you performance, but only if you treat the engines right. Agreed, Tommy and Jamie said in unison. Kowalski shook his head. Your mother knows she raised 2 crazy pilots? Our mother thinks we're both going to come home safe, Tommy said. Let's prove her right. 2,300 hours. Hangar 3 was crowded for the first time since this whole thing started. Tommy and Jamie, Frank Kowalski, Dalton Pierce, and Lieutenant Marcus Brennan, who'd shown up uninvited and refused to leave until Kowalski agreed to modify his engine too. If you're doing this for the Caldwell brothers, Marcus had said, you might as well do it for the rest of us. Solidarity. Now they were all there, watching as Kowalski laid out the procedure. 2 aircraft, 3 engines. Tommy's 43-7012 was already modified, but Jamie's assigned 43-7015 and Marcus's 43-6823 needed work. This is precision work, Kowalski said, his voice carrying authority. Tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. You rush, you make mistakes. You make mistakes, engines fail. Engines fail, pilots die. Clear? Everyone nodded. Lieutenant Pierce, you're with me on aircraft 7015. Lieutenant Brennan, you assist by documenting everything we do. Write down every measurement, every adjustment, every specification. This becomes our reference manual. What about me? Jamie asked. You watch, you learn. You understand what's been done to your engine, so you can feel when something's not right. Kowalski pulled out his tools. Your brother said your father taught him to listen to engines. Time for you to learn the same thing. They worked through the night. Kowalski and Dalton on one engine, demonstrating each step. Dalton's engineering background showed. He understood the theory behind the modifications, asked smart questions, took notes in a precise hand. Marcus documented everything: measurements, torque specifications, the sequence of operations, building a manual that other mechanics could follow. And Jamie watched his brother's crew chief work with the kind of intensity that made it clear this wasn't just maintenance. This was art. This was a craftsman who understood that every thousandth of an inch mattered, that precision wasn't about perfection, but about knowing where perfection was and getting as close as humanly possible. "The British," Kowalski said at one point, working on the supercharger impeller, "they've been building these engines since 1933. They have guys like Albert Whitmore who've balanced 10,000 impellers. They can feel when something's off. We don't have that experience yet, so we measure, we document, we learn." "Have you talked to Whitmore?" Dalton asked. "Not yet, but I'm going to. Squadron leader Henderson gave me the number for Rolls-Royce in Derby." Kowalski made a minute adjustment with a feeler gauge. Figure an old master mechanic might be willing to teach a stubborn Polish immigrant a few tricks. "You really think he'll help?" "We're all fighting the same war, and from what I hear, Albert Whitmore cares more about engines than politics." Kowalski stepped back, examined his work. "There, that clearance is .0023 inches, exactly between Packard spec and Rolls-Royce spec, the sweet spot." By 0400 hours, both engines were modified. Kowalski ran his final checks, measuring everything twice, making certain nothing had been missed. "All right," he said finally, wiping his hands, "these engines are ready. But remember, this is new technology, unproven long-term. You need to pay attention, feel how they respond, listen to the sounds. Any vibration that's unusual, any roughness, any hesitation, you report it immediately. Clear?" "Clear," Jamie and Marcus said together. "And you," Kowalski pointed at Tommy, "you're flying the original modified engine, most flight time, most data. You're the baseline. Anything feels different from normal, I need to know." "Understood." Kowalski looked at all of them. 3 pilots, 1 mechanic in training, all young men who'd volunteered to fly experimental modifications because they believed in the science and trusted the skill of a Polish immigrant who'd lost everything except his ability to make things work right. "Get some sleep," Kowalski said. "You're flying in 4 hours. Let's see if we did this right." They filed out of the hangar, exhausted, running on adrenaline and hope. Tommy hung back. "Frank," Kowalski looked at him, "thank you for doing Jamie's engine, for taking the risk. Thank your brother. Kid's got guts. Wouldn't let me give him special treatment." Kowalski managed a tired smile. "Reminds me of someone else I know. Yeah, well, it runs in the family. Your father raised you right." He tried. Tommy turned to leave, but Kowalski's voice stopped him. "Tommy, that promise you made, to bring your brother home. Yeah? It's not just on you anymore. It's on all of us. Me, Dalton, Marcus, Captain Garrett, even Squadron Leader Henderson and Albert Whitmore, wherever he is in Derby." Kowalski's voice was quiet. "We're all working to keep that promise, so don't carry it alone." Tommy nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Outside, the sky was starting to lighten in the east. Dawn coming, another day beginning. Jamie was waiting by the barracks door. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah, just tired." "Tommy, thank you. For the engine, for everything. That's what big brothers do." "No." Jamie's voice was serious. "That's what good men do. You could have taken the safe path. Let me fly a standard engine. Nobody would have blamed you, but you didn't. You and Frank, you're trying to fix a problem everyone else accepted as unfixable. The problem was killing pilots. I know, and now maybe it won't, because you gave a damn." Jamie smiled slightly. "Pa would be proud." "Yeah," Tommy said softly. "Yeah, I think he would be." They walked into the barracks together, brothers, pilots, partners in a dangerous experiment that might save lives or might end them. In 4 hours, they'd find out which. The modified engines would either sing the way they were supposed to, or the gap would prove impossible to close after all.